What if I told you that there was a deal that would make both Russia and China rich? They both know it, and they have both known it for years, but neither of them is willing to make the necessary concessions to get the deal done. Well, that is not a hypothetical. It is a reality. And it is the perfect case study to illustrate why you need to understand bargaining theory to make any sense of the bizarre world that we live in. Perhaps you have already heard the high-level version of the story. Fresh off Trump's visit to China, Xi welcomed Putin to Beijing for the latest renewal of their unlimited partnership. It was all smiles. The main speculation heading into the summit was whether the parties would finally make progress on a proposed gas pipeline to supply Siberian energy to Chinese industry. So the thinking went, China had held up the deal in previous years by demanding that Russia offer incredibly low per-unit prices on gas. However, Donald Trump's foray in Iran has changed the calculus there. Prior to the war, China sourced about 30% of its gas imports from behind the Strait of Hormuz. Although it will take many years to complete the pipeline, the higher baseline level of instability with Hormuz would compel China to raise its offer to Russia. Or at least that was the hypothesis. But nope, no deal. So what gives? Well, today we will begin with a brief history of the Power of Siberia pipelines. Then I will give an overview of the economic situation between the two countries in the context of the Ukraine war, and explain why it is natural to think that a deal should be happening. But then we will finish with a pair of bargaining frictions, hold-up problems, and private information that appear to be tanking the negotiations. But let's start with the POS pipelines. Oh, and just so we are clear, POS stands for Power of Siberia, a perfectly good name and abbreviation that causes no problems when discussing the pipelines casually. As you likely already know, a bunch of tiny creatures all decided to die in the region we now call Siberia. After applying pressure to their fossils for eons, they turned to natural gas, and now the Russian Federation tries to keep itself economically afloat by exploiting sales of the corresponding energy reserves. Unfortunately, natural gas is very hard to transport. Even more unfortunately, very few people live in Siberia who could use the gas. The best solution is to put the gas in pipes and send it to wherever the people are. Well, it turns out that China has a lot of people, so it makes sense to send the gas there. And that is exactly what China and Russia have done previously. The Power of Siberia 1 pipes gas from a couple of eastern fields right into China. Construction on it began in 2014, and they marked the occasion with the pomp and circumstance that you would expect. Here, you can see the first section getting welded, as well as this person on the right, who is definitely a serious inspector, and definitely not a model that Gazprom hired for the occasion. 5 years later, the first deliveries made it to China, and everyone was happy. However, Russia has a second major gas deposit further west. Meanwhile, China still has an endless stream of people. So the next natural question was whether Russia should construct a second pipeline for that purpose. And that takes us to the current economic situation, which will actually turn into an essay on yet another way that the Ukraine war has perversely distorted incentives. In the before times, Russia did not feel a pressing need to establish a pipeline from West Siberia to China. After all, there were rich and willing buyers all over Europe who were also closer to the gas fields. They even built a pipeline or two to facilitate the purchases. But then the special military operation lasted more than 3 days. European buyers began to reconsider their entire relationship with Russian energy, and someone may have decided to sabotage pipeline operations to Europe. European purchases persisted a bit longer than the more Euro-focused leaders would have liked, but the Kremlin now needed a new buyer all the same. As time progressed, the Kremlin also began feeling a pressing fiscal need to get a deal done. The Russian masses were not gung-ho about the SMO, forcing Putin to pursue an expensive voluntary contract campaign to keep the ranks staffed. Never mind all of the metal that the war has consumed. And as time has further progressed, the pink birds kept having the darndest bad luck in crashing into highly valuable, highly explosive locations. Meanwhile, throughout almost all of this period, China has been the same as it always has. It has a growing industrial base, and they love operating with cheap fuel. We have seen this through China increasing imports of Russian LNG, but that is a suboptimal transportation method. Thus, the pair were a pipeline match made in heaven, and yet, through 2025, they failed to get a deal done. China set contract demands at $120 to $130 per 1,000 cubic meters, roughly equivalent to the subsidized prices that Russian domestic consumers pay. Side note, these energy subsidies are common among autocratic regimes, and they are ridiculous. All they do is incentivize citizens to overconsume the fuel and find perverse applications for it, like Venezuelans converting electricity into bitcoins. It would be economically more efficient to sell the energy on the open international market and then pay the profits back to the citizens. Anyway, again, China sought $120 to $130 per 1,000 cubic meters. Russia was looking for twice the price, between $240 and $260, which is still a discount from post-invasion prices that Europeans tend to pay. I guess that is what happens when you remove a set of wealthy buyers from the equation. Regardless, there was no bridge to close the Russia-China gap, and so you had consecutive meetings where they discussed the pipeline and made progress, yet nothing substantive would happen in between. Policymakers in Kyiv just sat back and watched the whole affair in amusement. Then we had the Iran war and the meltdown of energy markets worldwide. Another pipeline not only provides an alternative for China, it is also less vulnerable to blockade efforts both at Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca in the event that Beijing makes a play against Taiwan. Hence the speculation that China might raise its offer price, and the parties might actually break ground on the second POS. So, what happened? According to reports, Russia kept its asking price at $240 to $260 per 1,000 cubic meters. And China also kept its offer price at $120 to $130. So much for progress. Well, if we want to get an answer to what happened here, we need to start talking about bargaining problems. Actually, we discussed these before in the context of the pipeline 2 years ago, when there was another failed negotiation. And just so we are clear, I am not arriving here after the fact to tell you that there are more fundamental underlying problems. I took my stand on the situation a long time ago, and my only regret is not having the foresight to have the thumbnail caption read "heated rivalry" instead. It was clear back in 2024 that the economically efficient thing to do was to set up the pipeline. Russia was not going to find a buyer who could offer more, and China was not going to find a seller who would pass the gas for less. So, in principle, a deal should have made them both better off. Sounds familiar, right? Consequently, if they did not get a deal done, then some bargaining friction must have stood in their way. That is the only way to explain an impasse given a mutual acknowledgement that a deal would have been better for both parties. In that light, whatever is happening over in Hormuz does not change the feasibility of the agreement. An agreement was always feasible. What would cause a change in the expected outcome is if something happened with those bargaining frictions, perhaps in how they interpret them in light of Hormuz, or because something entirely unrelated happened. Okay, then let's discuss the two major bargaining frictions. The first is called a hold-up problem. For gas to exchange hands, someone has to build the pipeline. That is a capital-intensive project that will not offer any returns for an extended period. Russia paid the entire capital cost for its section of the Power of Siberia 1. But you do not need me to tell you that Russia does not have the liquidity for that right now. Therefore, it would be up to China to foot the bill. The standard economic trade would then be for Russia to offer discounted rates on gas until it pays back China for the de facto loan. If only it were that simple. Beijing must worry about what happens once the pipeline is up and running. Whatever China poured into the construction is now a sunk cost. In turn, China must be concerned that whatever discount was agreed to years previously will vanish, and Russia will begin holding it to the market price. After all, if Moscow can find someone willing to pay more, it will find an excuse to sell the gas to that party. A cautious Beijing consequently forces Russia to front its share of the pipeline investment, which is exactly what the current proposal is. How has this bargaining friction evolved over time? Well, the holdup problem will never go away. The only thing that can mitigate it is Russia's ability to make the capital outlay. And I would say that has only gotten worse, as the continued war has only made budget constraints in Moscow tighter. The second of the two bargaining frictions is private information. China is under the impression that Russia is desperate to get a deal done, and thus will be willing to take a significant haircut to get there. Russia's position is that, no, it is not in trouble to the degree that China believes it to be, and so there will be no haircut at all. This sounds like a classic case of Russia having private information about its own vulnerability, and it is impossible for us as outsiders to know who is right. After all, if we could clearly see Russia's true position, then so could China, and either Russia would have no ability to bluff, or China would recognize that it is wrong and change its position accordingly. This asymmetry would also explain why recent negotiations between Ukraine and Russia have gone nowhere, so it does seem plausible. On one hand, it is surprising that this uncertainty has persisted for as long as it has. On the other, the Ukrainian refinery campaign has caused enough observable damage that it ought to exacerbate the differences in the remaining unobservable factors. And that might also be causing whatever has happened along Hormuz to cancel out in negotiations with China. And zooming out, I would not expect this impasse to last forever. At some point, China will concede that Russia is capable of holding out for the long run, or Russia will have to give up its bluff. And eventually, Russia's economy will return to a state where making years-long infrastructure investments will be a wise financial move. Okay, that one will be a while, but they will get there at some point. So I think it is inevitable that the Power of Siberia 2 gets built. But until the fiscal and informational problems get resolved, it will be difficult to finalize an agreement on the pipeline. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? The Power of Siberia 2 should improve both China and Russia's welfare. Bargaining frictions are getting in the way of reaching a deal. The Strait of Hormuz crisis does not affect bargaining incentives in the way that would be necessary to change things. And because Hormuz challenges do not override the frictions, we go another summit without a deal. Meanwhile, you do not have to wait to learn more about the politics of China. I have a playlist dedicated. I have a playlist dedicated to the subject. Autocorrect got me again. But boy, is that fitting for this POS video. Anyway, if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.